It's my distinct and considerable pleasure and honor to welcome Acacia Leakey to SoMAS and back to Stony Brook for at least a little while. So Acacia is from Kenya, having lived in a variety of places, sort of simultaneously, a farm to the northwest in Nakuru, is that right? Yeah. In Nairobi at the Turkana Basin Institute and at Illirat and Turkwell, the field locations on Lake Turkana that she will talk about. It's, as you're going to hear from her, just an incredible location where they have built sustainable communities in terms of food, energy, and water in the context of a very arid, climate change impacted environment. Just an amazing, as I was just saying, the epitome of a sustainable community living laboratory for Stony Brook University. So Acacia did her bachelor's degree in engineering from Stony Brook. She then proceeded to pursue a master's degree in mechanical engineering at Stony Brook, working with our good friend Ben Shaw on some sort of membrane system for water purification, something like that. Oh, probably attending real world use of application of her master's degree. Acacia is now, she has worked in a variety of jobs at TBI and at that farm, but many jobs at TBI as a highly important contributing member of TBI and the family that has contributed so much to our understanding of human origins. So that part of the context is also really quite amazing. Acacia is now the technical initiatives manager at TBI, and among her recent successes, she will be talking about solar power production and a solar RO water system that is operating at Illirat. She has a variety of other achievements, including being the co-founder of the Stony Brook Wildlife Conservation Society.
If it's still going.
Did I get it? Still going?
I said if it's still going.
It's still going. Okay, but you are here to meet and listen to Acacia. She'll be up here, and so speaking without her mask, so that everybody, especially those on Zoom, can hear her. Let us know if you have any issues with that. If you have anyone on Zoom has trouble hearing, let us know. But you're far enough away from Acacia up here that I think it's good for her to have no mask. So welcome, Acacia, and take it away.
Thank you very much.
Turn off the phone.
Good, thank you.
Can you hear on the microphone? Okay, great. So thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you all for coming to listen to what I have to say. I'm glad that you've got some interest in TBI and the work that we're doing up in Turkana in northern Kenya, and also I guess to everyone on Zoom as well for being here. So the Turkana Basin Institute is a research institution that was founded in partnership with Stony Brook University, basically to facilitate research in very remote areas of northern Kenya. So the basin itself around the lake has the richest deposits of fossils and archaeology and basically all of the evidence for human evolution. And so research has been done there since the 50s, but before TBI was constructed, if you were going to go up to do research, it's a 3-week mission to get up there. Instead of doing your science, you're worrying about how you're going to have water and food and look after everybody in what's quite a hostile place environmentally. And so TBI basically takes all of those logistical questions out of the equation and has the infrastructure to host researchers. And then off the back of that, we also have a sort of research community that's built out of the shared interest from all of the work that goes on in the basin. So there's 2 research facilities, and as you can see, they're in the very far north. I should use this. They're in the far north up here, and most of the population and the economy and agriculture is in the highlands down here and then along the coast a bit in Kenya. So the capital Nairobi is down here, and it's a 4-day drive up to Illorat. So it's remote. And so the 2 field stations both have their own water infrastructure. They have their own power infrastructure. Construction, all of the construction on both sides was done on site with our own employees and very basic equipment. And everything down to the trays that fossils are kept in or the desks in the classrooms, they're all made on site. And so we've got this incredible sort of backbone of infrastructure and operations, and that then facilitates the accommodation. We've got space for about 50 international visitors, up to about 45 resident staff at any time. And that's both for the visitors, both like dormitory accommodation for students and then other accommodation for researchers. And so when people come to TBI and they're doing their research, there's 24-hour power that's off grid. You've got great meals, your drinking water is taken care of, and then you're in this incredible living lab where all of the technology and all the investment that we've put into the infrastructure is sort of an experiment in and of itself. And so it's super exciting to be there no matter what your field is. One of the really nice things about being there is that a lot of the work, or the important stuff, I won't say the work, but the important stuff happens at the dinner table, because you're sitting there talking, say, to a geologist who doesn't automatically fit with what you're doing, but there might be some element of, say, lake chemistry that works with the sediments that they're looking at, or who knows what it is. So it's a really fantastic place to sort of have research discussions and get everyone in the same place talking about similar things. And so TBI has been the home to the Origins Field School since about 2011. So this is a 10-week program, 5 300-level courses, each taught over 2 weeks in ecology, geology, paleontology, paleoanthropology, so human evolution, and archaeology. And so you go from Pala, which is a research institute in the southern part of Kenya, operated partly through Princeton, and there you get to see the big animals and all of that. And then you go up north and you're basically in the field with the fossils, with the geology, walking through the sediments and really learning sort of in a way that is completely unique. And so the Origins Field School, we've had many students come through from Stony Brook, but also lots of other institutions. And each year we have several local Kenyan students who are given scholarships so that they can join. And then off the back of the field school and the courses that are offered, it was upgraded so that you have the option to take it as a graduate, sort of get a graduate certificate from it. And then through that, TBI has started in partnership with the Turkana University College, which is a brand new college in Turkana County near TBI Turkwell. We've started a human evolution biology master's, which is the first master's course of that kind in the country, which is completely mad given that it's a country with so much history and so much work that's been done in prehistory. So we're hoping that this is the first step to sort of systematically changing how people are able to access and be educated in the prehistory field. So The Origins Field School is really exciting, but we are looking to develop new field schools. So at one stage, we were talking about an environmental change and sustainability field school. And this really builds off the fact that it is a living lab. And so when you're there, you can work with the solar systems, you can work with the sustainable agriculture, you get to interact with people in the community, and the way that they live, the way that life is there is obviously very, very different, and there's so much to learn from that. And then it ties into the fact that TBI has this incredible history of, or the basin, I should say, of basically teaching us about our relationship with the environment and how climate change over many millennia has shaped who we are as a species. And so we can go with that mindset and think about the future and think about who we will be as a species in the future, sort of on that same thread. And then the second, that picture there is from the Global Innovation Field School, which was designed for engineering students. Well, partly for engineering students, but it's open to anyone. Engineers in particular, it's very hard to study abroad. If you're not taking like Mech 101, your first semester freshman year, you're not going to graduate in 4 years because all the courses follow each other. So this was a summer program, just 4 weeks. So 2 3-credit courses that fit technical electives. And it's for students who are interested in doing engineering in low resource settings, humanitarian settings, and kind of getting a feel for what that means. And in this particular instance, while the students were out there, there was a flash flood and a bunch of people lost their homes. Luckily, I don't think anyone died that time. But so TBI donated like a whole bunch of food and some household goods. So because the students were there, they helped in handing it out and things like that. So you really get to like be part of the community when you're up there.
Keisha, can we ask questions in real time?
If you want, yes.
Make it as a little bit conversational.
Yeah.
About the environmental change and sustainability field school. Can you tell us about the time of year, length of time, how many credits, what kind of student? This already exists, right?
The curriculum exists, but it never ran. So it is a same thing, 10 weeks. So 5 courses, all 300 level, looking at, I can't remember the exact courses off the top of my head, but there was water, energy, environment, looking at how people interact with the environment. And drawing off the research that was just beginning to get going at the time. And so, it was designed to be a semester program. And one idea would be that we would offset the Origins Field School, say have that in the spring and then have something like this in the fall. But all of the work that was put into that could be packaged, say, to do a winter course or a summer course, depending on what the interest is and what would be practical for students to fit in.
I can imagine lots of SoMAS students being interested in that. So
We can give you the plan that Kamazima and I developed.
great. Give it to the students.
So something that's really important to discuss is the community engagement program. We work in areas where people have very limited education. So if you go into sort of a fossil site and just start picking up fossils, people wonder what on earth you're doing because they haven't had the exposure to understand what paleontology is. And because it's such a remote area, it's marginalized, and there is a history of sort of people coming in and just extracting stuff without giving back to the local community. So the core part of the community engagement program is that it sensitizes the communities in the areas in which researchers work. So if, for example, we were talking with Josie earlier, that if somebody's going out to a particular place to do research, a representative from TBI will go ahead, will let people know that this is happening. If there's any sort of part-time jobs that will come of it, for example, if you need somebody to be doing, like some people will be in the field for 2 months, so you need somebody to do your laundry. Things like that, TBI will help that process. And that allows research to happen, and then you avoid all the friction and the uncertainty that can otherwise come about. And the key part of the community engagement program, the sort of one of the big parts of it is the scholarships. We provide 150, about 150 secondary school and college scholarships to children in the areas around the field sites. And it's really exciting. So this particular picture here, and I'll use the mouse. This here is Monica. She is a nurse from Ileret. So she is from the Dasnach ethnic group, which is a small ethnic group of about 20,000 people who live around Ileret. And she couldn't get to secondary school, but had decent grades. So TBI gave her a secondary school scholarship. So she did that, and then after that, she really wanted to go on to nursing, but again, her family didn't have the resources. So through the TBI scholarship program, she then completed her nursing education and has come back now to work in the village as a nurse, where before there's never been a Dasnach nurse before. And so like you can see it when the kids are, like this here is part of a nutrition and immunization outreach program, which is another component of what we run. And you can see like this kid here is super comfortable, like, you know, people are comfortable around her, which when you're trying to give people vaccines and you're trying to deal with these sensitive things, it's important. Not to mention the fact that as I was with some potential new researchers looking at the outreach, and as we were there, Monica's father was like going around saying, "Oh, do you see my daughter? Like I went and educated her, and now look at her." Because female education is quite a big challenge in the area, and it's really sort of, you go from equal 50-50% when kids are very young, and by the time they're at the end of primary school, you'll have a class of say 20 boys and 2 girls, because the girls have all dropped out to get married or other things. And one of the big challenges is menstrual hygiene. And so TBI also provides sanitary products to girls, so that at least they have the option of staying in school, and that's not a barrier to them, because otherwise that support is not available. And so here in the white t-shirt, this is Joanne. She is the community development manager, and so we had a few like lockdowns where you weren't allowed to travel between counties last year because of COVID. And so all the schools were shut, which, I mean, it's disruptive anywhere, but when you have a place where people don't have smartphones, so the kids are basically not doing any learning whatsoever. And in addition to not doing any learning, they're also sort of not part of those networks and groups of people who understand what school is and who have ambitions to go on and, you know, get further education and do other things. So Joanne set up these environmental clubs with the kids. So they'd go down to the lake shore and they would, you know, have a look at the birds, and then maybe like have some uji, which is like a local porridge, and then collect a whole bunch of plastic. So they collected an enormous amount of plastic, you wouldn't believe it. So that's partly what they're doing there in that picture. And then it also, in addition to the environment clubs, they had football tournaments, so emphasizing those girls tournaments and boys tournaments. And then the pre and post matches was like a chance to discuss all the issues that people were having. And then the last thing that we do with the community engagement program is to do educational outreach. So beyond just sensitizing people about what researchers are doing, it's helping schools build prehistory into their curriculum. Something that we're looking at now, which will make more sense further on, is like hydroponics, introducing sustainable agriculture into their curriculum and providing the materials for them to do so. And then the great thing about the community engagement program, it's there to serve the local community and to make sure that we can work seamlessly. But as we go beyond research in prehistory and you're doing things that are more applied, you're doing things that maybe involve people directly, like one of the new programs is the nutrition research, you already have this platform that you can use to get your research going.
Acacia, did
Yes.
the nursing student have to go far away?
Yes. Yeah, so there's no secondary schools around. So you've got to go 500 kilometers, which I don't know what that is in miles, but it's a long way, and it's on bad roads. And so sometimes people would go back for like 2 years and just live at the school before they get to come home because it's so far. Yeah, so it's a challenge. There's many logistical challenges. So long term, Joanne works with like the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Education, and basically is on their case and saying, you've got these people here, you've got thousands of kids with one school, you know, do the math, what's going on, and then also trying to put in boarding schools, because for the one school that there is, people have to walk like 5-6 kilometers or even further to get to school, which like is hard enough as a kid when you've got other things you'd rather be doing than sitting in a classroom to do that. And so there's lots of barriers. Yeah. So I thought I'd just touch on COVID and how that affected us. Overall, in retrospect, the main thing is that we were shut down. We didn't have visitors, but otherwise within TBI as an organization, we didn't have a single case. Everyone is double vaccinated, and so we're very grateful for that. When there was that early period and nobody really knew what was going on, and we thought that it was going to be this huge wave that would crash over us after seeing what was going on in Europe and New York, we started making masks. So this is Ruth from the village near TBI Turkana, and we had some new bed sheets that were sort of in a store. So we got out the bed sheets, cotton bed sheets, and made everyone masks. Turns out that when you're in sort of 100-degree heat, you're not going to wear a mask for very long. You'd rather just isolate. And then this is our welder and our plumber. And they came up with like a very basic design for a pedal-powered hand washing station. And so that was going on at the same time. They dotted them around. Then after they did this was at TBI Illeret, the welder and the plumber on the other side of the lake at TBI, so that's TBI Turkana, TBI Illeret, they wanted to make one that was even better. So theirs is super fancy, but still just made from materials that we had in the store for our general maintenance. And yeah, they've got the expertise to do things like this just off the bat. And then the other thing that happened that was like much more impactful in terms of, you know, how it felt on the ground was a locust invasion last year. And so that was really quite something, because we had hundreds of thousands, these huge swarms of locusts that came in and then would just decimate all of the vegetation. And fortunately, they came in quite a rainy year, so it would rain soon after they passed by, so the vegetation had a chance to recover. So for the pastoralists, for people who have goats, it wasn't too big of a big deal, but it was still, yeah, because I was living up at TBI Turkana at the time, and it was just really bizarre, because and you can even, there's so many of them that you can smell them, and then when they go into a tree, there's all the droppings, there's so much of it that it sounds like rain. So that was something that was really interesting going on at the same time. So this is now what I like. The technical initiatives, this role was created in January of 2020, and it has two components. One is to improve the sustainability of our operations, and then the second is to get more research going in non-prehistory areas. So part of that is there's like very low-hanging things, which I'll talk about, like decarbonizing some of the ways that we do water infrastructure especially. But it's really about capitalizing on the fact that we already have a living lab, and thinking about what that means and what we can do. And like, so for example, this is plastic recycling. So off the back of all the plastic that Joanne and her environment clubs collected, we started a plastic recycling enterprise at Illeret, where at the moment we are just playing around with various different things, and I've got some basic keychains that I can show you later. But what we want to get to the stage is that we're making things for the schools. So this here, they're making a sheet of plastic, which is about that big. So if you have 3 of those, you can have a desk, a seat, and a back of a chair. And then with a little bit of metal working, you've got a seat that can go to the school. We also want to do injection molded like model tools, stone tools, model skulls, things like that, so that people can have those things sitting in their classroom and, you know, allow people to have more access. And then there's some functional things that we're doing, like, for example, a lot of our buildings are out, sort of have a lot of outside space. And so the sockets, there's lots of wasps that like to go and live in the sockets and the dust as well. So we're making socket covers and all of that. But as we have the technology there, and this is something that we find a lot, once we bring the capacity and people play around with it a bit, everyone will have their own ideas and you get all sorts of new things that you've never have thought of coming out of it. Up at the top is the hydroponics. So in addition to the water infrastructure that we have and the energy infrastructure, we also have our own food production. And that initially was just started to address the fact that it's really, but it's not hard. There's absolutely no way that you can buy fresh fruits and vegetables at TBI Field. And at Turkwell, it's super expensive and poor quality because it's come up by road. And so this was just about making sure that staff had fresh vegetables to eat initially. And so we grow mostly spinach, kale, tomatoes, and then have some associated fruit trees. But it's really exciting because that, again, once it's started, you get all sorts of interest. And I'll be discussing a project that was basically born out of that. And then the building there that's under construction, it's the first time we are using, see that silver stuff that they're using here. This is a special kind of insulation that goes under the roof and it makes the building much, much cooler. So one of the things that we're going to be doing next year is retrofitting some of our infrastructure to see how we can make it more comfortable, because it is very hot up there. It's hot during the day and then it doesn't get cold at night. So the thermal load is very high. So yeah, the technical initiatives is really exciting. There's lots to be done. And so I'll discuss the decarbonization. So one of the things that we don't have enough of yet is data on our operations. And so that's again another big thing for next year is measuring everything so that we can actually get figures and say things as we make changes to the infrastructure. But one of the obvious things that we really needed to address was the amount of diesel we were consuming for our water infrastructure. So at TBI Field on the east side of the lake, we have a borehole that is very saline. It's got 14 milligrams per liter of fluoride, and the safe limit, according to the World Health Organization, is 0.7. So yeah, and it's got a bunch of other things that need to be taken out of the water. And so what we were doing, we had a small reverse osmosis system that needed a diesel pump. And then we also had, because the borehole is 8.5 kilometers away, you have to send a vehicle out to the borehole, sits at the borehole, pumps water with a diesel pump, and then drives back. It's about a 20-kilometer round trip. So from decarbonizing the borehole and the reverse osmosis alone, we are saving about 300 liters of diesel every month. And those changes were funded externally, which is ideally what we want to be able to do. In addition to the water infrastructure, we've also upgraded our power infrastructure at both sides. So you can see here in the background, this is some solar panels for a new power system. Incidentally, this tower here that you can see, it used to have a wind turbine on it, but wind turbines, like standalone, they're great on a big scale when you can have dedicated engineers to look after them. But with the moving parts and all of that, we just found that it didn't work. And I think it's important to discuss all of the things that we've tried. There's quite a few carcasses of things that didn't work. So when the wind turbine stopped working, the batteries simply couldn't carry the capacity that we needed. And so we completely replaced the batteries because they were old anyway, installed new sealed lead acid batteries that are designed to withstand high temperatures, and installed the new solar. And so it's slightly oversized, but that means that, like we're discussing again with Josie, where I've just been, is if we need to add another freezer to our system, no worries, we can do it. There's a new astronomy project that I'll discuss. We can add that infrastructure without a problem. So this, as I said, was sort of low-hanging fruit, made sense to do, and so that we've been able to do. And the water infrastructure investments we were able to make through the Water and Energy for Food program. So that is funded by a consortium of donors, USAID being one of them. There's also GIZ, EU, Sweden, and the Netherlands who've all invested in this. And it's basically what it says in the name. It's looking at water and energy technologies that support food production. And so this is our new reverse osmosis unit that can provide 20,000, it can treat 20,000 liters of water every day. And there we have the TBI staff doing the training. That photo was like, we were trying to take photos and we were actually doing training and none of them came out good. So then we had to pose a photo of people doing training. But we have the team who, like, the guy in the hat is the storekeeper, but because he's been at TBI so long and over that time, he's sort of, you know, human capacity developed. He's really fantastic with these sorts of sensitive machines that require very specific maintenance. And then down here is the solar panels for the borehole. And so one of the problems that we have with that, technologically it's completely fine, but it's how do you keep those things safe now? Because they're, as I said, it's 8.5 kilometers away from the camp, so it's far away. And what we're going to end up doing is hopefully working with one of the nearby families and providing them with fresh water in the hope that they'll look after the panels. But yeah, it's all of these things that you don't really think about when it's off-grid technologies. And
Can you make distilled water?
what's that?
Could you make some distilled water if people?
I think I don't know what the conductivity of the water is off the top of my head, but we're getting down to like 50 TDS. So it's very, like, it's perfectly good drinking water, but it's not like, you know, DI battery water.
How does the actual usage compare to 20,000 liters a day?
We're not there. We use about less than 1,000 liters of water a day at the moment for ourselves. The farm uses a bit more, like another 1,000 to 2,000. But the idea is that we will eventually be able to provide water to the local community. So Ilarat village, people either get their water from saline boreholes, from small sort of holes dug in dry riverbeds, which are super contaminated, or they get rainwater and there's not much rainwater. And so ideally, we will be providing water to the village. The only thing is that we need to be very sensitive that we don't put the infrastructure in, provide water for 6 months, and then find that the borehole can't support that level of extraction. So we've been making lots of purified water and we've been pumping lots and sort of building up our storage capacity just to look at the borehole. And for now, it looks good. It looks like it will handle it, but we want to go through sort of a prolonged dry season and then just see what will happen with the water table. And then we'll also later on discuss like the lake levels doing really weird things. So yeah, there's lots of strange things going on environmentally. So we want to make sure that if we provide people with a critical resource, that we can do so sustainably and they don't come to rely on something that we'll then have to cut off. So yeah, that's why it's at the moment not being used fully. Yes.
So how much does it cost to drill a borehole?
Lots.
I mean, yeah. So you can't just go out and drill a new one.
No. So this borehole's, yes, a little far away from the camp. It comes out at 50 degrees Celsius, so that's hot water. Comes out brackish.
Yeah.
It's 40 meters below the field station in terms of the elevation. So it's a nightmare to pump. So we had the bright idea of, in this budget, putting in $50,000 to drill a borehole on site. And there had been a survey done 10 years before that said that there would be water. So we got another surveyor to come. They chose the location. The drillers came up, they drilled, and there was no water. And it was the single most heartbreaking, defeated moment because it was at the beginning of this new exciting project. And yeah, so it is expensive, it's unreliable, it's not fun.
So,
Yes.
sorry, Dominic, but I thought Ben had, I mean, we even put in a proposal at one point to desalinize
Yes.
the
So
lake water. So whatever happened with that?
so that's what this machine is. It's a desalinator.
Okay.
And
But I thought it was going to use lake water and not water from a borehole.
so we'll get to the lake and I'll explain why that doesn't make sense. It's so I'll explain now in one sentence. So basically the lake came up by 2 meters over the course of a year. That's a 2-meter vertical rise, which translates to, in some cases, like hundreds of meters in. So if you've got any infrastructure on the lake, it's a nightmare to keep it in the right place and needs to be mobile, and how does that work with extending and removing pipes and all of that. So yeah, so the other component of the Water Energy for Food program is hydroponic training. So we've already got our agriculture program set up. At Illirat, it was a bit more stunted because of the lack of fresh water. So now we can expand it for our own use, make sure that all the staff have like a good, healthy diet, because we've got the reverse osmosis water. And then we're also training members of the local community to do the farming. And this here is Shadrach. Shadrach is wonderful. He is a super passionate farmer. He's the farm manager, but he also runs the training program. So between Shadrach, myself, and Michael, who manages the farm in Turkana, we put together a syllabus to do training in hydroponics in a way that is locally adapted and makes sense in our local context. And so we have 12 trainees at the moment. They're going to be doing quite a long training course. They'll be on site for I think it's 20 weeks in total, and then they'll have a 6-month sort of probationary period where we sort of help them get set up and all of that. And that will then also depend on water going out to the community so that they can have these farms in the village. And the feedback that we've had just in terms of their attendance, like there's a lot of challenges, and this is a bit international development-ish project, but a lot of those, like, people would just come because they expect to get something out of the training. And once they realize that, no, it's just really hard graft learning to do something new, they'll drop out. But in the first 10 weeks, we had 97% attendance, and all of the times that people missed, they said so ahead of time that my kid is sick or whatever it is. So they are super keen, and Shadrach has done a fantastic job at, like, you know, being able to do that, to do the education, especially because most of them aren't literate and most of them can't even talk Swahili very well, which is the national language. And so we had this thought, we didn't know whether or not to teach in Swahili or how we were going to choose the trainees, but we've ended up having a really great mix where some of the students are quite advanced and can speak Swahili, and then they will help the other students. And so it's a really nice atmosphere in the group. And so some of the new programs, as I said, the other part of hat I wear is to get new research programs going. And this is really exciting. We're hoping to get a 60-centimeter telescope installed at Illirat, which would allow for some basic research to be done. It would be robotically controlled, so you could be sitting here in Stony Brook at 2 o'clock in the afternoon looking at the night sky in Kenya. And then it's really fantastic, like in terms of the location. First of all, because it's dry, there's not too much dust, there's no air pollution, there's no light pollution. But also there aren't very many, or if any, telescopes at that longitude and that latitude. So it's quite a rare location to have a telescope. So this is something that we're hoping will get going soon. And in addition to just having the infrastructure, we want to build the academic programs in the country so that we can actually bolster astronomy locally. Because at the moment, there's not a single optical telescope of this size in Kenya. And so hopefully from this investment, we'd have undergraduate programs which would lead to PhDs and then lead to people who can work in this field in Kenya, having been educated in Kenya. And here, one component of that is really starting from the ground up. So it's working with kids getting them to look at different planets. Unfortunately, this day we had these people up with the like outreach telescope for 2 nights, and it happened to be like the 2 nights out of 2 months that were cloudy. So we saw Venus for 10 minutes and they got super excited when the clouds covered. But yeah, the kids were super excited, and I think there's just something about space that everyone can relate to. So yeah.
Acacia, yeah, let's continue interrupting you. I'm just curious if you all have thought about building a community school at Illiret or Turkwell, and I sort of ask because what an opportunity for a teaching school for teachers, right? To learn the craft of teaching in a very different environment with very different students. I mean, I guess you'd have to speak Swahili.
Yeah.
That would be a challenge depending on where they came from. Anyway.
The challenge would be funding for something, because you'd have to put in all the infrastructure, and then when you get teachers out or nurses, anyone basically who's from further south in Kenya, who's well educated enough to be a teacher or a nurse, and you bring them to Turkana, they last not a very long time unless they have a nice house and they have access to water, because they're used to those things. So if they're told to go live in a hut and then like walk a kilometer to get their water, doesn't work. So that's it. It needs to be like a big sort of thing, and then we'd have to have boarding with it as well, because that would allow the kids to not have to walk, and then you have to feed the kids, which would be fantastic because it would mean that they can actually learn while being properly nourished. So yeah, it would be amazing. It would be really amazing.
What a major effort.
Yes. Then one other sort of, it's not quite research, partly research, but it's a new thing that's going on. We've got a Fulbright scholar from Case Western University, and she's working at TBI Turkwell with the Turkana University College. She is a nurse and has developed curricula in China and other developing, well, China was developing at the time that she was there. And so she's working with the university to set up a new nursing program that will, again, be suited to the local needs, be suited to the incoming students that you have in that area, and then hopefully get around that problem where people don't want to live in a place because it's hard to be there because they're from there. And then you have the added benefit of the fact that they speak the language. So that's also super exciting. Then this is sort of just, I want to touch on some of the things that we don't do enough of. And this particularly comes from living out there for 4 months in the lockdown with not a lot to do. I spent a lot of time looking at birds and little elephant shrews, which are just adorable. But there is so much about that environment that is not yet understood. Like, for example, I was looking for papers on mycorrhiza, and there's a few on sort of Paleolithic, like rhizoliths, but there's nothing about what's going on now in an environment where you've got land degradation, you've got deforestation due to charcoal production, you've got all these changing weather patterns. That just seems like something that's lots in there that's really exciting to look at. And so, yeah, there's tons of birds, there's just an incredible ecosystem. But one thing that has been well studied is the bees out there, and there's Dino Martins, who runs Impala, which is the institute that works with Princeton, and he's also got some kind of affiliation with the Ecology and Evolution department. He did a postdoc looking at the bees in the area and found that there was just incredible diversity, like it was beyond what anyone could have expected. And also there was some sort of very primeval, like early bees in that area still alive. So super interesting. And then also thinking about conservation, thinking about what the implications of that are for income generation through tourism. All of that is really interesting, and it's really not being done at all. There's one project from Helsinki which is looking at hyenas and bats, but other than that, there's tons to do. And then, of course, climate change. I hesitated to put this up because it's easy to say that everything that's strange that happens now happens because of climate change. But this storm happened at the end of May this year. We hadn't had any rain the whole year, not a single drop. And then we had this monumental storm that came basically out of nowhere. It ripped like more than 20 trees out of the ground. This roof here, up here, this was completely destroyed. It just like bent these metal members. We had so much water. It was like I was in a house that didn't have, like, it had a big veranda, no walls. And within 5 minutes of it raining, there was an inch of water inside below the roof. And so who knows what it was, how much water there was, because the storm blew over the rain gauge and the rain gauge broke. So we don't know what it actually was. But there's so many strange things happening with the climate at the moment all over, and this isn't being well studied. We've got some weather stations that's sitting down the corridor. So we're going to install those, and then at least we'll have that basic data, because we haven't had that for this year. So that will be super interesting. And then lots of projects hopefully can come out of that. And then another thing is the livelihoods, and thinking about like how the research that we do can impact sort of local communities. Particularly because all of the people who live in that area are very heavily dependent on the environment in one way or another. So whether they are pastoralists who rely on water and grazing, or whether it's fishermen relying on fish stocks and decent weather on the lake, and all of that sort of thing. So it's that component of it as well, and that was really well highlighted by weird things going on with the lake at the moment. So I'll start off with this picture here. This is Central Island, which is a beautiful island in the middle of Lake Turkana that has 3 crater lakes. Not very originally named. There's Flamingo Lake, Tilapia Lake, and Crocodile Lake. So this here is Tilapia Lake. And as you can see, there was this big lake level rise here, and it's come up again more recently. And the 2 lakes have now joined. And I don't know if you can really see on the slide, but you can see the darker water from the small lake is beginning to sort of flow out into the main lake. And nobody knows what that's going to do to Tilapia Lake. Nobody knows if there's something that's been, evolving in there that's going to come out and impact the main lake. And so with all of these changes, it feels like we should have been doing all of this stuff yesterday or whenever it is. So there's lots going on with that. And then the lake coming up has had a big impact on the fisheries. On the west side of the lake, where there's more vegetation and stuff, people haven't been able to physically get to the lake because it's sort of coming up in ways that there's no proper shore or anything like that. And so I know somebody who got a loan to buy a boat and an engine and fish nets, and has basically been stuck with this loan and this equipment and hasn't actually been able to use it because he can't get to the lakeshore. Whereas on the east side at Ilarat, the fish stocks have been amazing and people have been selling tons and tons of fish, to the extent that, I'll say that the fish gets exported down through the south of Kenya all the way across Uganda into Congo from Ilarat. And so somebody in Congo apparently started a rumor that fish from Ilarat is what causes Ebola in that region because they were flooding the market. So then that little rumor goes all the way back to Ilarat, and then the fish collapses. And so hundreds of people were then basically stuck without a way to make money because of this. And for me, that was a really nice little example of how, even though these places are really remote, they're removed from each other and removed from what we think of as interconnectedness. It's still a globalized world, no matter where you are. And then also with the lake level coming up, you get sort of water sources that are already bad being made worse. And so we've had several cholera outbreaks over the last, I think we've had about 5 over the last 18 months. And so that's directly related. Everyone says, like seeing the water come up, like in 2 months time or 1 week time, we're gonna have cholera, like it's coming. So the nurses now know to get prepared when they see that. So this rise was like came up really quickly over the course of a month from where these trees are to where the lake is now. And you can see this road has been flooded. And the really interesting thing, or another really interesting part of this, is that Lake Turkana was supposed to dry out in 30 years. That's what people were saying about sort of 8 to 10 years ago, because most of the water for the lake comes from the Omo River that flows out of the Ethiopian highlands. And the Ethiopian government has put 5 big dams on that river. And the dams themselves aren't too big of a problem, but there's now lots of irrigation, agriculture that they're taking out. And so it was a really big thing where we were really worried that you'd have these millions of people without access to the lake, that you'd end up with communities so previously being separated by the lake coming into contact and then having conflict because of that, and all of these different things. And now the opposite has happened. So yeah, who knows what's going to happen next. And so that sort of the lake example is one event that's caused all of these different things, that has the sort of ecology element to it, it has a climate change element to it, it has geology, it has economics, it has the cultural, public health, and all of that. And there's so much opportunity to do new research, new projects, and really sort of break new ground up at TBI with the work. So I would like to leave you with a request or something along those lines to think about how your work could be applied there. If you know of somebody who's looking to do a project that has some kind of interest, we were more than happy to direct them towards a certain project. And I'm more than happy to talk to anyone about any element of this further. If there's information you need, I'm very happy to provide it. So hopefully we'll welcome some of you out there soon. So yeah, thank you very much.
Well, I'm sure Acacia is eager to entertain your questions, so take it away. How do I know if there are questions
On Zoom.
on Zoom? Guess you have to raise your hand. How do I see the hand raising?
Nobody has their hand up right now, so you're
Okay, you might need to yell out. Any
will do.
questions from anyone? Go ahead.
How much of the food overall is grown at the institute versus imported?
Not much if you look at it in terms of the weight, because dry goods, things like rice and beans and all of that, we can bring up and store. So we really focus on the fresh things that we can't store for long periods of time. And then we get a lot of our meat from local goats or cows or whatever it is. So yeah, it's not much. We eat it every day, but in terms of the absolute volume or weight, it's not that big of a contribution. But hopefully one day it could be more. Yeah.
Other question? Let me ask you about the transferability of your sustainable. Let's stay with food. To export what you're doing to the local communities requires a certain amount of water quality for the hydroponics and the energy to do that. And so to repeat what you're doing at Illirat in local communities, is it just a matter of money, or how does that go? I mean, to me, this is one of the most interesting things. It's such a sustainable community that you have built. So in terms of community engagement, how do you repeat it?
So I guess, well, yeah, it's a tricky one, because as much as TBI has the infrastructure, the most valuable thing I think is our human capacity. So we have a fantastic team that can take on the reverse osmosis and they can manage it. But in order to replicate that, we then need to look at it from a systematic level and work with institutions like Turkana University College, work with the county government and develop training programs so that people can actually do the maintenance themselves. And it might be that we don't go to we're not training technicians per se, in the sense that this is somebody who can, I don't know, like comes from a technical background and speaks English and all of that. It might be that we find, there was one group on the other side of the lake, I can't remember exactly what they were doing, but they were finding that old women were the most reliable people within the community. So it might be that we train specifically only old women to manage certain types of technologies, and we work with the county government to develop a program and bring people from all over the county to work with us on that. So it has to be done at the systematic level, because as you say, it works there because of the resources that we have. But if we were to then replicate it elsewhere, you need to build the capacity before you can do that sustainably.
So that capacity, that limiting resources, people to manage it.
Yes, so we've got to have that some way of doing the education at some level.
Hey, I have a question. Can I jump in here? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
we can. Bob.
Okay, this is Bob Aller. So what I'm wondering is, what is the age of the water that when you make a drill hole, what is the age of the water you're accessing and how fast is it recharged?
I don't know, and I would love to know.
Mhm.
What do we need to do to find out, I guess, is my question back.
Well, I mean, there are tracers you could utilize, like freons and carbon-14, depending on the time scale of recharge and the source of the water. So those are the kind of options you would have. Okay, I have another question, if I can keep going here for a minute. One is, so when you raise plants hydroponically, are you using plants that, well, there used to be a field of research called biosaline research, which tried to use plants that had a high capacity to handle saline water. Do you use plants that are adapted to high salinity, relatively high salinity water, or are you going with plants that are sort of normal genetically?
All of the hydroponics is using fresh water. So it's the water out of the reverse osmosis machine. And that's why we have a machine that can do tens of thousands of liters. But obviously one of the byproducts of that is brine. So we've got this somewhat saline brine. It's about 3 times the salinity of the lake water, that at the moment, after the failed boreholes, we know how low our water table is. Like, it's very, very low because we dug quite deep. So at the moment we're recharging it into the ground, but ultimately it's a resource. So we want to use it, whether it is to look at if we can do like irrigation for grazing on a small scale, and then provide like food for livestock. There was some talk of doing like saline resistant shrimp or something like this. So that's something that we need to look into. So it's another facet of the work that needs to be done.
I do have one more question regarding recycled plastic material. Is it possible to recycle plastic material to be used in 3D printers, or is that an entirely different source material?
There are people trying to do that in Kenya, but the problem is that when you have your 3D filament, first of all, it needs to be like, there's very little sort of error that you can have in the thickness of it. And then it has to be exactly the same all the way through. So sometimes when you're getting plastic from the environment, it might have impurities even if you wash it out. And we're not doing it at the level that we need to be able to sort of have that high accuracy. But there are people working on it in Kenya. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any more, Bob? Is that it?
That's it for the moment.
Okay. Anyone else? Joe?
Extracting salt. Could that salt be edible?
Oh, I doubt. I don't know. I don't know. This is where again I have to like put on my engineer hat and say I don't know, because it's got lots of fluoride, it's got manganese, it's got boron. Those are the main things that are very high in the water.
Yeah.
And so we'd want to extract that, and then maybe if we could evaporate some out, send it to some labs in Nairobi and see if there's anyone in Nairobi. Nairobi's the capital where all the industry is. See if anyone can use it, and then maybe use like sell it, but not, I wouldn't. No. Yeah. So
No cold salt.
Go ahead.
Hi, is TBI involved with the aquaculture industry there at all? Like any like hands on aquaculture? Are you thinking about it?
So when I was there doing, well, it's essentially an internship after high school, before I came to Stony Brook, that was one of the things that I was working on. But we were trying to do it with zero inputs. So use like goat dung to seed the water and get the algae to get the feed the fish. And the water quality wasn't very good, but we also didn't have equipment to measure it properly. Then also we didn't have any way to keep male fingerlings separate from female fingerlings. So we had fish that were breeding wonderfully, but they'd only get to about this size and then stop growing. And so I spent several weeks trying to sex the fish, which that was just complete failure. I don't know why I thought that was a good idea, but when you have, it's so hard to keep the male and the female separate. And then we tried to source male fingerlings, but we are at least a day's drive away or more, day and a half from the nearest like places where they grow fingerlings. And so maybe in that there's an opportunity to become like a local place to produce the male fingerlings, and then get fisheries that sort of adapted to the local context and the fact that people have to do it with minimal resources. But also we do have tons of solar power, like that's one thing that we do have lots of. So develop a system that works for Turkana and then sort of disseminate it, and then also be a hub that we can continue to provide male fingerlings. But again, that's something that takes, like, we have to have expertise, and I don't know whether they treat the water with hormones and what the impact of the runoff is and all of that. So it would be super interesting to do that, because yeah, the fisheries are so, who knows what's going on. They fluctuate a lot. Yeah.
Speaking of tilapia and fisheries
Yes.
a little bit, could you speak to sort of some of these lakeside communities and to what extent they are reliant on fisheries, or is it purely subsistence? Or you mentioned this whole sort of aside about trade and bad rumors. So is there sort of an ongoing export for these communities? Is this a source of income, or is this primarily for subsistence?
It's income. It's income. So the Turkana, which is the ethnic group that live along the west side of the lake, have been there for about 300 years. So the first 250 of that, it was fishing for subsistence, but the people who are fishing were kind of looked down upon, like they don't have goats, they don't have livestock. But when there's a drought, they're the people that everyone else goes to get food, because they've got that expertise. And then in the 80s, there was this huge development program by the Norwegians, and they put in these really big, like, fish processing units, and then these hubs, and it was, yeah, I didn't answer your question in the end, Josie, but this was an example where you have this big investment of infrastructure, and then the lake went down, and then all of a sudden these fish processing places were kilometers away from the lake shore, and so that completely failed. But then what we have at the moment is Somali Kenyans, for the most part, for Ilarat, who will go up, they own the trucks, they lease the boats, or they sort of give people boats and nets and engines, but those people then have to bring them fish, sell them fish. And so they're the ones who really make the money, and the people from the local communities don't actually like get that much money from the fisheries. So yeah, but that's for export, and it's all goes out salted. So the last 2 years or so, there's been a big push to have it fresh, and then to also look at what else people can be doing with the fish. So there's the Nile perch is quite common in the lake, and so they are using the skins to make leather, which is kind of cool. It's actually really nice. Yeah, so there's lots of innovation in that space as well that's driven by the international development donors.
Thank you.
Other questions or on Zoom? I have one remaining about the water. You said it did the opposite. Is that related to management in Ethiopia? What is it?
Nobody really, I haven't spoken to anyone who confidently knows what's going on. There hasn't been enough rainfall for it to be to do with rainfall, but some people are saying it's a combination of slightly higher rainfall and land use changes. So because people are doing more agriculture, because there's less vegetation, the same amount of water is coming in, but it's coming in with a whole load of sediment. And that, I don't know. But also all of the rift lakes along from Turkana, Baringo, Bogoria, Naivasha, Nakuru, these big lakes, some of them big, some of them small, but they all have come up massively. And so we were having a conversation wondering whether maybe it's something to, on a bigger scale, sort of tectonic, that's causing this. But that Lake Turkana has been going up and down for millennia. So who knows in this instance what it is. But it is very interesting.
And before we do that, let's thank Acacia again.